listening to or watching What's the Tea. My name is Lydia.
My name's Andy.
We're not going to have our normal kind of bantery start of a podcast.
I love how you actually said the word a bantery start.
Start. Yeah.
But I guess our point is that we are flying straight into a particularly kind of sensitive,
serious
subject.
topic. Yeah. So at this point, I will issue a trigger warning that in this podcast episode, we'll be covering and discussing themes of domestic violence. So yeah, pause here if you want to. Make sure that you've got things around you to look after yourself if you want to listen. It's okay to stop partway through, watch the rest of it if you want to. And if you don't want to listen or watch at the moment, that is totally fine.
Okay.
That is perfectly fine. I'm probably going to do most of the talking in this one, aren't I?
I mean, we've already made a point of trying not to be too jokey.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep my answers short and say yes.
Yeah. So I think just to explain...
I might ask you a few questions.
Yeah, you might ask questions, which is good.
I think the first question would be, why are you likely to be doing most of the talking?
So I would never say I'm an expert in supporting survivors of domestic violence. But out of the two of us, I'm probably the most qualified, as I've just, it's a year ago, I completed my master's in understanding domestic violence and sexual abuse. So I studied it for 2 years whilst working. So in terms of qualifications, I'm probably the most qualified to talk about it.
Out of the two of us, you're definitely the one who is qualified in supporting survivors of domestic violence.
And kind of educated in it, know a little bit more about it and the terminology and things like that. I thought we could start with, before we go straight into talking about domestic violence, is focusing on what's a healthy and unhealthy relationship.
Could we talk about what we mean by domestic violence?
I go into that in a bit.
Okay, as well as what it is and what it isn't?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Let's talk about healthy relationship then. That's good.
Yeah, I prepped all of these notes last night, so Andy is flying blind today. So yeah, I thought it makes sense to talk about healthy and unhealthy first of all, and then we kind of slowly get into the topic. Okay. So I would say a healthy relationship is where it's full of love in all aspects of the relationship. There's equality, there's trust there, it's a supportive relationship. Obviously, healthy relationships, there's arguments that happen, but it's dealt with in a healthy way. Not to say that, every healthy relationship is perfect. You're learning together. Yeah. But I think that's the key part. You're learning together. An unhealthy relationship is, there's probably still love there, but it's not in all aspects of the relationship. There might be, themes of jealousy, a lack of trust, and in terms of lack of equality, there's probably one person that's more of the center of the relationship than the other person. Yeah. So healthy, it's kind of 50-50. In an unhealthy, you're probably looking at 90-10% of that.
It's a lot more focused on one over the other.
Exactly. Focusing on their needs and basically how can they, win or get the most out of the relationship, rather than being like, how can we both get the most out of this relationship? And I felt that was like really crucial, because not all unhealthy relationships will lead to domestic violence, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay. It just means it's probably an unhealthy relationship, and you can either work on it to become healthy, or you leave that relationship and that partnership. Yeah. And then kind of, I think the way that you can, tell, whether it's likely to lead into something as domestic violence is, the phrase that I think we commonly hear a lot now in today's society is red flags. So red flags in the relationship. So red flags are basically early indicators that someone's behavior exhibits kind of toxicity, or that will lead to kind of domestic violence behavior. So some people will be like, oh, is a red flag, there's like violence in the relationship. No, these are early indicators before it gets to that step. So we're looking at kind of early stages of kind of jealousy, might say things along the lines of, you made me feel like this. It's very you did this wrong, and things like that.
So I guess, though, it's the difference where we talk about red flags, green flags, and so on and so forth, mostly in a very jokey way. We're talking about kind of the more kind of extreme, very serious toned red flags.
Yeah,
behavior.
Definitely. So
it's like, just to be clear.
Yeah. So it's like, for example, if your partner gets angry, they start throwing things around the room. I would say that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
Because it shows that they can't manage their own anger in a healthy way, which could potentially, not all red flags lead to it, but it could potentially lead to some more damaging behaviour later on down the line. Slightly making comments about what you're wearing, just being like, oh, okay, you've chosen to wear that. Why? Or being a little bit more like, I think you should wear this. And questioning a little bit more about your day. Obviously, in a healthy relationship, you want to ask about your partner's day. But in terms of a red flag, it feels like it's on the verge of more of an interrogation, of being like, well, who did you see? Why did you see them? I didn't know you were going to see them. Why didn't you tell me? And then I'll talk a bit more about how that can mean
talking about your day and being quizzed about your day.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got, your red flags that are kind of early signs of behaviour that's toxic, that could potentially lead to kind of domestic violent behaviours. Now, let's talk about what domestic violence is. So the legal definition of domestic, I'm going to read it because I'm not going to remember it off by heart. So it's quite a lengthy legal definition, so I do apologise, but it's important that we read it out. Have a sip. So domestic abuse involves any single incident or pattern of conduct where someone's behaviour towards another is abusive and where the people involved are aged 16 or over, or equal to being 16. So they have been personally connected to each other regardless of gender or sexuality. The abuse can involve, but is not limited to, psychological, physical, sexual, financial, emotional, violent, threatening, controlling, coercive behaviour. It does break down what a personal connection is to help us in this matter. So it means when it talks about a personal connection, it means the individuals that are concerned are due to be or currently have been married, civil partners or partners to one another, have been in intimate personal relationship with each other, are or have been parents or had parental relationship to the same child, are relatives, so that is parents and siblings, so kind of immediate relatives. So that's kind of the legal definition. So when we're talking about domestic violence, we are talking about that.
Okay.
Now there is some debate, which I won't go into just for time purposes, about why 16, why isn't it younger? So studies have found, sadly, that as young as kind of 13, 14 have been in, technically by the legal definition, domestic abusive relationships. But sadly, it cannot be classed as that because of their age. Okay. So there is campaigns going on a lot with people that work with youth and, adolescents to say that needs to change in terms of age. But sadly, the law states that you have to be 16 or over for it to be considered a domestic abusive relationship. I think it's to do with like the legal definition of consent. You have to be 16. I think it ties in with that really.
But I guess if there's concerns about anyone who's under 16, that's where we go down kind of safeguarding routes and things like that.
Yeah. So some people, including us as YMCA, will go down the safeguarding route regardless if they're over 16. But yes, if they are under 16, immediately triggers a safeguarding. There's kind of there's no discussion around it, and that's more than likely where social services will be involved. Yeah. Not because the parents have done anything wrong, unless obviously the parents are the perpetrators in this instance. But if it is a romantic relationship, it's just so the social worker can support the parents in supporting the child.
Support around the child.
Yeah. So social services aren't always involved just because the parents aren't parenting.
Because it's like, just because there's an age difference doesn't mean there isn't any support. Doesn't mean it's not taken seriously.
It just means that there's no legal ramifications between two parties that they're both the same age. Obviously, if someone was older,
it's a
that's
different way of looking at it at this current moment of time. Yeah,
definitely. And I think so. Interestingly, this only came into law, I want to say it changed around kind of 2015 time, or even
it's quite recent.
sooner. Yeah. So psychological, coercive or emotional abuse was not a legal definition of domestic violence. It was just the physical aspect. But a lot of research has been done by some fantastic scholars, so educated kind of professors, but also services that support domestic violence, into saying that actually the psychological and emotional abuse is just as damaging as the physical stuff. And so the law changed to encompass all aspects of domestic violence, not just the physical aspect, because the physical aspect sadly is just the visible thing that you see, and not all domestic violent relationships are physical. And it's proven that the psychological abuse is far more damaging than the physical abuse to some extent, because it takes longer to recover from it than the physical aspect, the physical injuries and things like that. So it's a relatively recent law change. And
I guess that's a reason why we're talking about it, why we're talking about this on this podcast, because it's another way to kind of talk about it. It's a way to kind of bring light onto it.
Exactly, 100%.
Increase awareness of what it is.
Yeah, and I think as well, which I'll talk about a bit later, but it's heavy in the press at the moment, rightly so, about a lot of cases of people that are in positions of power or positions of like a role model significance, where cases are coming forward where actually they are being investigated or charged for domestic violence. Obviously we had the Me Too movement not that long ago and things like that, so it's very heavy in terms of in society, very public. It's not as public as I think it should be, but it's still there far more so, that's the right way to say it, than it was, I would say, probably 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, it's very topical at the moment. Still not talked about enough in my opinion, but hopefully the point of us discussing it is to educate, but also to help in any way that we can, support anyone that's listening or watching that knows someone or is going through something as kind of horrific as domestic violence. I thought as well that it might be good for me to kind of break down kind of what the psychological kind of abuse is, because everyone hears psychological and they get their own kind of thinking hats on of what it could mean. So it says psychological, and it also I think mentions coercive as well. But they are interlinked. So coercive behaviour is the deliberate and calculated patterns of behaviour and psychological abuse that are designed to isolate, manipulate and terrorise a victim into complete fearful obedience. So the coercive behaviour is getting them to obey, and using kind of psychological techniques to help them in that kind of gaining obedience and authority over their partner. And then you've also got your isolation. So isolating is making the individual feel guilty of who they spend their time with. If it's not with their partner, solely with their partner, they might express a constant dislike for the people that you're hanging around with, including family members, basically trying to get you to turn against your family and friends and your social network, and getting jealous over your time spent with other individuals, including colleagues. So you hear cases where it's like, I had to quit my job because, my ex-partner didn't like the fact that I worked with men, or I saw my colleagues more than I saw them. So it's completely isolating them from their social network, which does make it harder for that person to leave that relationship because they don't have anyone to support them once out. And I think that's crucial as well, is a lot of people go, why don't they just leave? If this is happening, why don't they just leave? And sadly, it's not as simple as that, because of the psychological aspects of it. If someone is completely isolated, it's like, well, I'm solely dependent on this person. Might be financially dependent as well, because you're isolated in your finances. So they're the complete breadwinner. They have control over your assets, your finances. So if you were to leave, you'd have no money, no way of supporting yourself, and you've got no one around you. So for them, it's easier just to stay in the relationship sometimes. And we can talk a bit about how to support someone that or where you can go if you feel like that. If you feel totally on your own. Now, gaslighting is a term that's frequently used in today's society. You'll see it a lot. Oh, you're gaslighting me. It might be used in kind of a bantery way, in a joke of like, are you gaslighting me if a prank's happened? But it's frequently used in the wrong context in today's society. I think it's one of those words that's just snowballed. That means that it's lost its meaning and people don't quite know what it means. So gaslighting is where a partner makes you doubt your own reality. So, for instance, you might turn around and say, oh, it really upset me when you said that. and say exactly what that person said, and the partner will go, I never said that. You obviously dreamt it. Or why are you lying? Why are you always lying? Why are you making me feel bad? And it happens so much that it makes that person doubt their own version of events. Now, obviously, sometimes in a relationship, even in healthy relationships, you might not agree on what was said. So it's being careful of the language that I think is being used when, you know, someone says, you know, it really upset me when you said that. Because it is possible they've remembered it wrong, or it's how they've interpreted what you've said. So the best response, I would say, so you're not on the verge of like, you know, using kind of gaslighting techniques, is being like, I'm really sorry that you feel that way and that upset you. I don't recall me saying that, but if I did, or if that's how you understood that, again, I apologize. So you're validating that person's feelings. I think it's really important. And as support workers, we do that quite a lot, of making sure that we validate residents' feelings, because what's to say that person isn't feeling that? You're not that person. You can't say you don't feel sad, or stop crying, or why are you feeling this way? So I think it's important to validate a partner's feelings, which I think shows the complete contrast to the gaslighting technique, which is, no, that didn't happen. Why are you lying? Now, this happens so frequently that it makes a person, like I said, doubt their own reality.
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking, yeah, because we need to make a point that it's about the pattern of behaviour. Pattern of behaviour,
yes. Yeah, so, you know, if you do it once, obviously it's not great. Wouldn't recommend it.
It's not great. It's not recommended. It could be a misunderstanding.
Exactly. And it's just changing that language to better the relationship as well. And it's a more positive way of communicating. But when we're talking about gaslighting in regards to domestic violence, it's frequent gaslighting. Yeah. The example I just gave is one example of how it can happen. And it's happened so frequently that I spoke to someone many years ago that worked with victims of domestic violence, and they said that victims that have left their partners maybe 2 or 3 years ago, have been in therapy for, you know, a little while, still doubt their own version of events because of the effects of gaslighting. So it's like, you know, they'll be like, this happened. Well, I think it happened, but maybe I'm remembering it wrong.
Blimey.
And it's because of that constant doubting of your own reality as a result of the gaslighting. Yeah. And again, it's a really, you know, talking about it sounds extreme when you're talking about it, but you've got to remember that I'm making it more obvious by using kind of obvious examples to demonstrate what gaslighting is. It can be a lot more subtle than the example that I gave. Fact as to where gaslighting comes from, because this is just interesting. So the term gaslighting comes from a 1938 play. It's a British play. So in the play, the husband dims the gas lights in the home constantly when his wife's left alone, and then denies that the lights changed. He does it to make her believe that she cannot trust herself or her memory. And in the play, basically the wife ends up losing her sanity and goes insane. So that's where the term gaslighting comes from. So again, a really extreme play, but I think, you know, that's why the term gaslighting has come from, because it's doubting that own reality. Any questions? I know I've talked a lot about a lot of information. It's hard stuff to talk about.
I think I've interrupted you at the right times when my questions have come up.
Okay, great. I just want to double check that I'm not going kind of too fast, because like I said, like it's like when you have like a teacher.
He's double checking his questions.
I think that when you've got a teacher or a professor or something that knows a topic, they can sometimes talk about it, forgetting that they're talking to people that have never studied this or experienced this. So I like to make sure that, you know, what I'm saying kind of makes sense and it's being said in a way that everyone can kind of understand. So we talked about why people say, why don't they just leave? You know, it's their fault, they're staying in the relationship. And like I said, it's not as easy as that, again, for various different reasons,
and
as previously mentioned.
Of flying through this.
Oh,
I mean, there are multiple reasons why someone would stay.
Yeah, exactly.
There's multiple different aspects to everything that we've talked about.
100%. And again, some of the examples I've given are just some of the examples as well I'd like to highlight of psychological abuse. There's so much, and there's, again, it's still a subject that ever changing, because it's still something that it's not new in today's society. Sadly, it's been around for centuries, but it's very new in terms of us having awareness around it. So there's a lot more information coming forward, and a lot more detail, but those are kind of the key ones that I think a lot of people might identify with or see or acknowledge quicker. But also, it doesn't happen as quickly as some people believe, and it's not as obvious as I think sometimes, dramas on TV will demonstrate. Because I'm sure if you were in a relationship and there was, physical violence within the first 6 months, I would hope that most people would leave at that point.
Yeah.
If it came out of nowhere, it was a very loving kind of relationship, and then all of a sudden,
and then we snapped.
Yeah. Which it does happen, but it's very rare. What happens is there's kind of a cycle of abuse that happens. So like all relationships, there's a honeymoon stage. Even the most abusive relationships will start out as the most loving relationships that you'll ever experience. And, it's, you're feeling really happy, it's really balanced at this point. The perpetrator of domestic violence will be very charming, likable. And there's also a term called like love bombing. Yeah. Which again is a very new term, and it's basically just showering you in love that you've never experienced before. So you become infatuated with this person. And then the tension starts to build. So it doesn't go straight from loving, like we said, and then bam, kind of blows up. Tension starts to build. So this might be, again, some of where the red flags come up. So throwing things around the room when getting angry, might, again, start making kind of subtle comments. And it's slowly building over some time. Then it kind of goes into kind of the blow up stage, and that's where kind of the abuse is at its worst, and most of the time it will be physical abuse if it gets to the blow up stage, and then it will go back to the honeymoon stage. They'll apologize, they'll shower you in love. I'll never do it again. We'll use some gaslighting techniques at this point of being like, well, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't react this way, and putting all the blame on the other person. Sure. And then it'll have a period of loving again. Then it builds to tension. Then it blows to the blow up stage. And then at some points, if it goes on for so long, it will go from honeymoon stage to blow up. There will be less of a tension stage, or the tension stage will be shorter. So it's not as easy or simple as some people might see from the outside of how an abusive relationship will build or start. It's very subtle, various stages that happen, and the times between the stages can be long, it can be short. Every relationship is different. Yeah. So that there's so much more that I could talk about kind of domestic violence and educating, but I've narrowed it down to kind of those key things that I think are the most important to acknowledge.
If this is a topic that you'd like us to, lovely listener, if you'd like us to revisit, drop us a message. Yeah. Through all the normal ways, drop us a comment, and I'm sure we can
I can talk about it. I can talk about it more. I'm very passionate about this subject, hence why I studied it, and I can talk for hours about it. I can go on rants, which is not the platform to do it, but so if don't worry if you're like, well, they've already talked about it, what more can they talk about? I'll find a way to talk more about it. I'm very passionate about it. So I thought this might be a good time to say to go into kind of, if someone you know or you yourself,
let's talk about support.
Feel that you're experiencing an abusive relationship. These are the steps that are here to kind of help of where to go. So a lot of people will be like, well, I'll just tell that person to leave the relationship and help them leave. Now, be mindful that when someone leaves a domestic violent relationship, that's when they're the most risk of harm, leaving that relationship. Whenever you hear kind of some of the big cases that hit the press, that has been at the stage when that person has tried to leave the relationship. Okay. Now, I'm not saying don't encourage them to leave or anything like that, but you need to be aware that they need a safety plan before they just pack up and go, to ensure that they're safe. And there are services that are specifically designed for that. So you can speak to those services on behalf of someone, and they can help you create kind of a safety plan. There's a website. All the services that we talk about today, by the way, will be in the kind of the comments or the description of today's episode.
Yeah, the show notes will
have
it. I couldn't think of the word.
all
the...
Yeah. So great resources that you can get is from an organisation called Safe Lives. So we use them frequently in our work. There's a lot of forms that we use from there, and they can talk about kind of safety planning or where to go to get some safety planning. So don't try and be a rescuer and try and rescue that person and remove them from that relationship, because you could be doing more harm than good. You know, think about it, put a safety plan in place and things like that. There's the free phone National Domestic Abuse Helpline that's run by Refuge. It's free anytime, day or night, and we'll put the number there rather than me just reading it out. They're a great service. You know, they do it on a day in and day out basis. They are really knowledgeable in what they do in terms of how to support. So there's a free kind of helpline there. There's Women's Aid, again, support resources, but they've also got a live web chat. Okay. So if it's not safe for someone to speak on the phone, or for whatever reason you don't have access to a phone, but you might have access to the internet.
And also not everyone likes talking on the phone.
Exactly. There is a web chat that they can use. Men's Advice Line. So this is for men that are victims of domestic violence. So the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, they might assist you, but a lot of these services are more geared for women victims, and I'll go into a little bit about why that is the case. Okay. But there is Men's Advice Line, so if you go onto their website, there's a free phone number again. We'll include the number again with the link, and they support men that are victims of domestic violence. If you are a Christian, there is a Christian domestic support service called Restored. So you can contact them, and they will give you advice of where to go for any support. And there's some courses that they do for survivors, don't like using the word victims, survivors of domestic violence, where they can kind of help build skills and tools. They also educate churches. Fantastic. So if you're listening and you're like, actually, I would love my church to know more about this and be part of Restored, your church can, for a small fee, join up to Restored and have some training around domestic violence. So it's a really great service. So going and actually getting, I guess, practical kind of support, in-person support. So Fear Free used to be called Splits, used to be called Fearless. Now they're called Fear Free. Okay. So same service. It's a domestic abuse support service, and you can refer yourself, or you can get a professional to refer you through their websites, and you'll get allocated what's known as an independent domestic violence advisor.
Is that a national service?
So that's local to Devon.
Local
to Devon. Thank you for reminding me of that. So that's the Devon service, but there is many domestic violence services around the country. So most of them are advertised through your local council website. Okay. So you can just type in on Google domestic violence support service in your area, and it will come up of the different organisation that is in your area.
Fantastic.
They rely a lot on public funding and kind of donations. So some services shut down and others open. So being mindful of those changes as well.
Sure.
So yeah, Fear Free, you get an independent, or any domestic violence support service, you'll get an independent domestic violence advisor known as an IDVA. And what they do is they assess kind of the risk around you. You can still be in the relationship to get support with that service. You don't have to have left your partner. And if you are at a level where they deem it's really high risk, they will have your case presented in a multi-agency meeting where various different services come together to best support that survivor of domestic violence, and again come up with safety plans if that person is willing to leave that relationship, for them to leave safely.
Sure.
SAFE is another organisation. So SAFE stands for Stop Abuse for Everyone. Again, it's designed to support survivors of domestic violence, but they support predominantly those that have left their partner. So if you're still in a domestic violent relationship, they aren't the best place to support you. But they do kind of group support, so you can meet other survivors, talk about your experiences, and kind of do group therapy. But they also do one-to-one counselling as well. It's not free, however, they do base the charge on your income. So if you're on income benefits, I think the lowest amount that they charge is £5 a session. So it's really affordable. And obviously, if you're full-time work, then obviously I think the standard fee is, £45 for an hour. And you get so many sessions there. It's a really good service. And obviously, if you or someone is in immediate danger, then it's 999, the police. Or if you want to report something historic, then it's 101. The police have got a lot better in supporting and handling cases of domestic violence, again, through a lot of the public kind of attention, but also through a lot of the fantastic work that some of the services that I've mentioned have done with the police, where they can refer you to services. They also are the ones that they have a whole domestic violence department, so they have domestic violence officers now that predominantly work in this area.
Brilliant.
And they are involved in those agency meetings as well that I mentioned if you're deemed high risk by your IDVA. So they've got a lot better, still not a completely flawless system. Like any systems, there's tweaks and stuff that could be made, but it definitely got a lot better than previous history has demonstrated. And I thought it was also, those some of the services, but I also thought it was important to say that it's difficult when you see someone you love and care about potentially in a domestic violence relationship, that's friends or family or someone in your social network, and they might not see it. And if you point it out and go, that's domestic violence, you need to leave them, they're likely to remove themselves from you because of the fear of their partner finding out that someone knows. So don't go all guns blazing is what I'm saying.
But also if you actually don't agree with what that person's saying, that I imagine that must sound really weird to that person, even though you as a person saying it might be fully spot on.
100%. So it's just being, again, mindful of what you're saying to that person. So it can just be something as simple like, I'm here if you ever want to talk. Here night or day. I'm just a phone call away. If you need me in an emergency, I'm there. Just these subtle messages. And I mentioned it to someone previously and they were like, if I said that to a neighbour that I saw something and I was a bit concerned, or someone, or even a friend, they'd probably tell me where to go. And I was like, that might be the case, but at times where they need you, they will remember that you've suggested that a couple of times and they will go to you, even if they've been quite hostile when that's been mentioned or denied it. So just giving that kind of subtle phrases and but also if you're really concerned, you can speak to some of these services and they can offer you advice as well. Also, I thought it was really important. It was mentioned in my course this, and I was like, oh yeah, we are all guilty of doing this. It's being mindful of when you're with your friends, talking about your relationships. We all like to have a bit of moan about our significant others. It's normal. Our significant others can annoy us. But I think it's really we need to be mindful of our responses, because if someone is in a domestic violent relationship or an unhealthy relationship for that matter, they might say something as a joke or in a bantery way to test the water to see if it's normal. Because for them, that's normal. They think it's a normal part of the relationship. If they've never been in a relationship before, they might think that's what a relationship's like. So they might say something along the lines like, oh, my partner always gets angry if I'm running late with dinner, and might joke it off or laugh at it. And a lot of us could be like, oh yeah, men, right? Am I right? Oh yeah, my partner did this the other day, or, whatever. And then that person will be like, oh, okay, it's normal, shut down, we'll not see anything wrong with it. So it's just being like, oh, do you wanna, what do you mean? Do you want to share a little bit more about what happened? Oh, why were they angry? Did they say why they were angry? Did something happen during their day? Asking kind of some open-ended questions in a friend way, not in a support work way. I know that sounded very support workery how I said that. But just in a friendly way of just asking questions, being like, oh, really? What happened? So then it opens the conversation. Now, they might not go out and say, I'm fearful of my partner and this is happening. But it might slowly get them to open up and for you to know what's really going on.
Yeah, I guess all this sort of stuff, it kind of comes down to very small steps. Yeah. The kind of gradual process of opening up rather than boom. Yeah, exactly.
And I know, like, how we're talking about it, you might be like, oh my goodness, everyone's in a domestic violence relationship. And it was a bit like that when I was going through the training. You kind of saw signs everywhere because it's on the forefront of your mind. And I'm not saying, everyone's in an abusive relationship or everyone around you is going to be in an abusive relationship or even you're in an abusive relationship. But it's hopefully you having the information and knowledge will help you detect some of the early signs and start questioning some unhealthy behaviours. And I use the word unhealthy behaviours because, again, not everyone's in an abusive relationship, to kind of move it towards more of a healthy relationship, or for you to realise, actually, this isn't going to change from unhealthy to healthy and might look at, ending that relationship.
We should probably start to kind of bring this
I got a little bit
some sort of close.
Yes, I have got it.
If that's possible.
Yeah, it is possible. It is possible. Like I said, I could talk about this for hours. So, like I mentioned previously, sadly, a lot of domestic violence support services and campaigns are geared towards women as the predominant kind of survivor pool, victim pool of domestic violence. But sadly, statistics do show that it's a prominently women issue, and that majority of the perpetrators are male, sadly, of this specific crime.
Which does not mean the opposite does not happen.
Exactly. So the Office of National Statistics in 2013 released this statistic that 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic abuse since the age of 16. So it's predominantly a female issue, and then I think so it's 27%, and I think for men I think it was like 15%. So real kind of marginal difference. Now that's not to say though that men, like you said, men don't experience it. Men are less likely to probably report it because of the stigma around it, but also women underreport. It's shown that it's domestic violence as a whole is underreported. So if everyone reported what was happening, there still would be a marginal difference between women and men. So that's why you see a lot of like Women's Aid and a lot of these services that will only support females in that matter. But that's not to say, like, as we said before, it can't happen to men. Please.
And that's important to be said. And I thank you for making a point of making sure we say that.
100%.
Because, again, if we don't talk about it, actually, that's another possible avenue of it being talked about, being ignored.
Exactly.
So
and I think with men being survivors or victims of domestic violence, physical violence still happens, but less so. It's more the psychological side of things that happens predominantly more so with the men survivors than the physical side. Physical side can happen, but it's predominantly more psychological. So I thought we could end to talk about what can we do to help prevent domestic violence. Okay. So the first step is education. So this is the first step, us talking about it, educating. What we do at the YMCA in Exeter, especially at the St. David's Hostel, is that our supports change. We run courses now that's part of the support that you have to engage in. And one of the courses that we run is healthy relationships. And it's 4 weeks, and we do cover domestic violence in one of the weeks, red flags, healthy, unhealthy, consent, etc. So we're really trying to educate people so then they've got the information to help prevent them from...
And people have those tools.
Exactly. Helping them prevent getting into either an unhealthy relationship that could lead to domestic violence or just entering a domestic violent relationship. I would say please do read up on it. Make sure it's reliable sources. So like some of the websites I talked about got lots of information on there. So reading up.
And again, those websites will be in the show notes.
Exactly, yeah. Speaking out, I think, is another key one. So if you see someone being mistreated, speak out. Yeah. I think that's just a good rule to have in general, really. The number of times that we will see something and not really do anything about it, we'll think someone else will. It's the bystander effect. We always think someone else is going to step in. But likelihood is everyone's thinking the same thing as you, and no one will speak out. And, if your mates are telling jokes that are not okay, they're horrifically sexist, or you just see some behaviour, do challenge them. Don't laugh along, challenge them, because that's when things start to change and behaviour starts to change and people realise that actually these things are not okay. There was a campaign recently I mentioned, like Me Too, and a lot of other stuff that came out, and a lot of people said it's not all men. Not all men are abusers, and that is not what we're saying. The campaign was not saying all men are abusers, but what it was saying is we can't say not all men until people start standing up and challenging behaviour that we are seeing on a daily basis. So very misogynist stuff that we see online, that's, towards hating women or other things. Again, speaking out about it, reporting stuff that you see on social media, because the more that we do that, the safer environment it will be for everyone. And support. is the last thing. I know we've talked about support, I'm not going to go into about, but supporting one another. So if you and your friend have been through something similar, is being there for one another. Don't try and have a monopoly over your experiences. Just have a space. I think we can all be guilty of doing that sometimes. If someone shares something,
oh yeah, I had that happen. Yeah,
and it's an ADHD trait. So if you've got ADHD,
interesting.
It's because it's a way for you, or an autistic trait. It's a way for you to try and relate to that person because you don't know how to otherwise. But I think the best thing is to going, really sorry that happened to you. Do you want to talk about it more? And then allowing their space for you to talk about your stuff as well, and just being supporting. Just helping heal survivors essentially.
Okay.
Not to say we're going to completely eradicate it. I'd love to live in a world where that happens. But hopefully these small steps will eventually just reduce that statistic of 1 in 4 women, and that's reported as well. 1 in 4. That's not including the underreported women of being victims of domestic violence. Now, I'm really sorry that was a very deep, serious, depressing topic to talk about, but important.
Thank you for that. Thank you for kind of opening your brain and sharing your knowledge on that subject. The support resources that you mentioned will be kind of attached to wherever you find this podcast. Yeah. We're going to finish there. Please subscribe wherever you find your podcast providers. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
Probably be a bit lighter than this one.
Yes, hopefully. But also look after yourself if you've listened through to this whole podcast.
Do something positive for yourself, for your brain. Take care.
Take care. Bye. Thanks.